Most people think the word quarantine feels modern, cold, scientific, maybe a little bureaucratic. Something invented by doctors with clipboards or by governments stamping passports. But the real story behind the word is older, stranger, and so much more human than that. And to discover it, we need to travel back nearly 700 years to one of the most beautiful and chaotic cities in history, medieval Venice. Imagine Venice in the 1300s. Not the postcard version with gondolas and tourists, but a loud, crowded, living organism. Ships docking day and night. Merchants shouting in the markets. Sailors from every corner of the world carrying spices, silk, precious metals, and sometimes deadly diseases. Venice was the beating heart of Mediterranean trade. But with that came a constant risk, the plague. The Black Death arrived in Europe like a ghost slipping through a door. No one saw it coming, no one understood it, and by the time they realized what was happening, entire communities were collapsing. People didn't know about bacteria or viruses. They didn't know what caused disease. They just saw the symptoms, saw how quickly it spread, and panicked. At first, Venetian officials tried something basic. When a ship arrived from a suspicious port, they forced it to wait offshore for 30 days before anyone could disembark. This was called the Trentino. 30 days. A full month bobbing on the waves, with the city in sight, but completely off-limits. If you can imagine dozens of ships anchored outside the lagoon, you can imagine how surreal and eerie the coastline must have looked. But here's the problem. 30 days didn't stop the plague. People were still getting sick. So the officials did something wonderfully medieval. They guessed. They didn't conduct experiments. They didn't consult experts. They simply said, let's increase it. Maybe 40. And that was it. Just like that, Trentino became quaranta giorni, 40 days. And from that phrase, the word quarantine was born. But 40 days wasn't chosen at random. The number had powerful symbolism. It shows up in religious texts again and again. 40 days of rain during the Great Flood, 40 days of fasting, 40 years of wandering in the desert. It was a number that represented purification, cleansing, transition. People didn't need to understand biology to believe that 40 days was long enough for something dangerous to burn itself out. But here's a detail most people don't know. The Venetians didn't just isolate ships. They created entire islands dedicated to quarantine. Real islands, some of them still exist today. One of the most famous was called Lazaretto Vecchio. If you arrived in Venice and the authorities suspected your ship was carrying disease, you weren't allowed into the city. Instead, you were ferried to that island, a strange, isolated place where doctors in long robes and bird-like masks examined travelers, burned contaminated goods, and kept the sick separated from the healthy. Picture an island filled with abandoned cargo, wooden crates stacked in the sun, men standing at a distance from one another, and guards patrolling the shore. It must have felt like a world between worlds. Not Venice, not home, not anywhere you wanted to be. The system worked well enough that other cities copied it. Florence, Genoa, Marseille, Ragusa all adopted their own versions of the quarantine. And as trade expanded, the word traveled from port to port, language to language. It crossed borders quietly, just like diseases did. By the 1500s, quarantine was a standard practice across Europe. By the 1700s, it was part of global maritime law. And by the 1800s, quarantine stations existed everywhere, from New York to Australia. A word born in Venice had become international policy, shaping travel, migration, and public health for centuries. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Quarantine escaped its original meaning. It slipped out of the world of ships and ports and entered everyday language. In the 19th century, people quarantined animals. In the 20th century, they quarantined plants. Doctors quarantined diseases. And in the digital age, we even quarantine computer files. Somehow, a medieval solution based on guesswork became one of the most universal ideas in human society. Isolate something dangerous, wait long enough, and hope it becomes safe. And the number 40? Even though modern quarantines rarely last exactly that long, the name stuck. It's a linguistic fossil, an ancient idea preserved in a modern world. But the story also reveals something deeply human. When we hear the word quarantine, we imagine medical precision, laboratories, scientific certainty. But its origin reflects the opposite: fear, improvisation, trial, and error. People trying their best with what little they knew. Venice wasn't protecting itself because it was confident. Venice was protecting itself because it was scared. And yet that fear gave birth to something incredibly effective, something that outlasted plagues, pandemics, governments, and empires. A simple rule: wait 40 days, shaped centuries of public health, and likely saved millions of lives. And that's the strange beauty of it. The word quarantine isn't just a medical term. It's a reminder of how humans face the unknown. We don't always start with perfect knowledge. Sometimes we start with guesses. Sometimes we borrow ideas from religion, tradition, or instinct. Sometimes we choose a number because it feels meaningful. And sometimes those choices echo across centuries. So next time you hear the word quarantine, remember, it wasn't born in a laboratory. It wasn't invented by scientists. It didn't come from data or research. It came from Venice, a city built on water, battling a disease it didn't understand, making rules that became global without ever meaning to. It came from sailors watching the city from a distance, counting down days. From guards enforcing mysterious rules. From doctors wearing masks that look more like costumes. From a number repeated in ancient stories. From fear, hope, and human creativity. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes history's most powerful ideas start as simple guesses. And sometimes a word travels the world not because it was brilliantly invented, but because it worked just well enough, and because people kept repeating it. That's the strange, surprising journey of quarantine. A word that survived plagues, crossed oceans, shaped nations, and still carries, hidden inside it, the memory of 40 uncertain days in medieval Venice.